Welcome to Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Irwin. For new viewers, especially as we're going on Facebook Live today, my background includes 40 years of being a firearms dealer, a range owner, Nevada law enforcement officer, firearms trainer, expert, and a frequent expert witness in shooting cases related to court issues when firearms are used. We are all aware of the tragic murders at the Douglas High School in Florida on Valentine's Day. There's nothing else on the news but that. The 19-year-old murderer, armed with a modern sporting rifle, in this case a Smith & Wesson, what we call a CAR-15, a semi-automatic standard version of an AR-15, invaded the 3,000-student campus and began shooting almost everyone in his path. This special edition of Fired Up is designed to look at solutions that could be helpful in preventing or heading off future shootings. My guests today are Lenny Davis. He's a retired federal agent and firearms trainer. He is here to review school security and the issues of hardening targets to prevent this type of thing from happening again. Also with me is firearms issue attorney Donald Green. Don will address for us the constitutional issues involved in social media investigations and what you can and cannot do in violating the First Amendment and Second Amendment to root out these people. We're all aware of the FBI's problems relating to this, that apparently they were tipped off and couldn't follow up for a number of reasons they felt. Anyway, we're going to start off by talking about what I view as the single most important issue here, which is hardening the target. We have experience with foreign areas where they have hardened the targets. The Israelis come to mind right off the bat, where they've had some school shootings and they haven't had one successful since, because they're taking this seriously and protecting their children. So, Lenny, if you want to talk a little bit on that, I will give you the floor and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's part of the biggest problem. I looked at this and I mean, there's a lot flying around in the media right now. I looked at this school, did some research, found out it's what they call a single point of entry school. It's a school that you can't just walk into the campus. It's fenced or walled off, which is good, except when you have a single point of entry, that's where you need to have your security personnel. And obviously they either didn't have security personnel, and they were supposed to. Then I also found out that a lot of the schools consider, if you are going to do a single point entry, you're supposed to, they have a sign, report to the office. Well, this shooter obviously didn't care that he was going to murder 17 people, so he didn't bother to stop by the office. This is where you're talking about the layered effect of security, and there's anything, and I don't care if you're doing a security for the President of the United States or any other event. Everything is layers. You have an outer layer, an inner layer, until you have everybody really close to the protectee or the protected target. And obviously this hasn't been done. It's been somewhat done. This was a school with 3,000 students, which is a pretty good size high school. We have some here in Vegas that are that size. Mm-hmm. Clark County School District Police, they assign police officers to the schools. There is at least an armed person on board on the school grounds during the regular sessions. I understand there was some sort of armed school officer at this particular high school, but didn't get into the fray until after the shooting was over, and the individual escaped, basically. There's a lot that could be done. This kid was done. He'd been expelled for violent behavior. I guess he attacked another young man at the school, and there was problems with him. So they went ahead and expelled him already, and so you knew this guy was problems. And I'll get into the law enforcement aspect of that in a moment, but here's where if the school district would have had video surveillance and could do and there's a ton of facial recognition software that's available where they basically, as the students walk through, the computer and the camera will pick up the face. They could have put this kid's face in their facial recognition points and pick this kid out. But it didn't happen. I don't know if the school district didn't have that or what the story was. So that was a problem with it. I see another problem in the fact that as of this morning, I understand the Broward County Sheriff's Department had been called to this kid's residence in the last 3 years, something like 36 times. That's a huge red flag. You've got police coming to this kid's house all the time. Where is the social, the social workers? Where are the judges or the juvenile police officers saying, look, this kid's incorrigible, which it sounds like he may have very well been. I don't know. I haven't seen what the calls were, but 36 times. This kid, and now we're going to talk about the social media. This kid posted tremendous stuff on Facebook and some of the other social media, photographs of him holding guns, photographs of him holding knives. Not that that's a real problem, but he also posted on somebody else's, I think it was Snapchat, that he is going to be a professional school shooter. The individual did what everybody from Homeland Security and law enforcement says: if you see something, say something. This guy got a hold of the FBI and said, look, this kid posted this on my Snapchat, my social media. And the FBI said that they opened a case on it. It came out today that they opened a case on it and they investigated it, but they could not find this kid. They could not determine who he was. Although he used his real name and where he was from. And that's, to me, as a former 31-year law enforcement officer, just about the most unconscionable thing I have seen in a long time. I'm glad I'm not that FBI agent in Florida who sat down with that, because he's ultimately responsible for the deaths of 17 innocent people.
Let me digress off of that just for a second, because that's one of the issues we're going to come up with that I think falls right into where Don Green is involved. When we have the First Amendment of the social media, how do we work it to come in and investigate? Now, this guy was all over social media, but a lot of them are more subtle than that, obviously. How do we, under the First Amendment, investigate or detain people for threats that may be just blowing off steam? There's your ball.
Thank you. Well, Bob, the First Amendment protects protected speech, political speech, religious expression. But one thing it doesn't protect someone from screaming fire in a crowded theater, or someone who makes articulated, specific threats on the internet, Twitter, Snapchat. We actually have laws on the books in California and Nevada, and there are also federal laws in Title 18 which prohibit someone from threatening someone else with bodily harm. You don't have to cross state lines, but every time you use social media, every time you use the internet, every time you use your cellular phone, that is a means of interstate commerce for which the feds have jurisdiction. And it wouldn't surprise me if the feds might not even pick up this case for interstate communication of threats and violence and acting on it. When we have the First Amendment, yes, there's protected speech. My holding a hunting rifle, showing myself when I got a prize elk in Utah during hunting season, that's a form of protected speech. A dancer one of the very famous cases in the late 60s of strippers. That was protected speech because the dancer is expressing through her body. But when it comes to, these threats, that's where it stops. And in this case, there is no invasion of privacy or no invasion of the First Amendment when someone puts the threat on the internet. And as Lanning points out, acts on that threat, and the police have something to work with. And in this case, yes, between 2010 and 2017, when this kid was between 12 and 18 years old, the police did go to his house some 36 times, and not one written formal report was done. Why? Was it to protect someone? Was it because he was adopted? Was he was adopted by perhaps a Cuban or Hispanic family? Was that the problem? Is that the problem now? Has political correctness taken over the issue of First Amendment? And then that does, when you have protected speech, the answer would be yes. But when you have someone who has made the threats, someone who has stated that he is going to be known as a professional school killer, and I find it kind of coincidental that the massacre in Florida, in Broward County, is on Valentine's Day. All we have to go back is what, 1927? The same Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago by alleged police officers of mobsters. Those were mobsters who probably needed to be killing, with all due respect. But the thing is that when someone acts on the threat, like it is in this case, or has the present capability to do it, I think the police have enough to at least get a warrant, do further investigation, and as Lenny points out, in his experience as a former federal agent and as a firearms instructor and an expert in firearms, why didn't they do something? This could have been prevented.
I agree. That seems to be the obvious answer. And it's clearly, by the cases you're citing, it's not protected speech. It's actually not covered by the First Amendment.
And
threatening people is a crime.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, I think we're such a litigious society that, you tend to want to sue everybody anymore. And now I think a lot of law enforcement may very well be a bit gun shy because they're afraid if they go out and say, look, we're going to take you in and question you, that they're going to get sued. And those are the things that I think sometimes hold that stuff back up, hold the actual enforcement of that. There's a lot, back on security, there's a lot we can do. There's a lot of talk about getting, retired officers, retired military, people that have skill sets to come in and be, if you will, armed guards on this. Here's where this thing would have been stopped cold yesterday. You're not going to stop everything. There's nothing, folks, that you can do that you're not going to be able to stop everything. It's just not going to happen. If they can't do it in the school, if somebody's hell-bent on this, it has a revenge against the school or other students, they'll do it off campus. You can't protect everybody everywhere. I'm sorry, it's just there's no magical law that's going to be able to be passed that's going to make that happen. But if you brought in the armed security in this instance where you have a single point of entry into this high school and you'd have put armed guards there, okay, those guys would have stopped this guy. Yeah. This guy was known. He was told by the school that there was a message put out, an email to every teacher, I think, at this school, if not in the entire school district, that, hey, if this kid comes back don't let him back on campus, and especially if he's got a backpack. So this kid shows up yesterday, took an Uber there with a rifle case, his AR-15 in his rifle case, and a backpack, and proceeded to get out of the Uber, put on some sort of tactical vest, and proceed to go into the school and do this horrific shooting. So there are plans for that. At least I think there are people considering it. I don't know where the funding's going to come from it. I know the school districts are always saying we don't have enough money, but folks, we say our most precious resource are our children. Well, let's start taking care of them. I would rather see, and don't get mad at me, my artistic friends, I love you all, but you know, the National Endowments for the Public Arts and those kind of things, maybe we take a little money off of that and put it into securing our schools so these kids can grow up and be artists. There's nothing you can do that's going to stop this. There's no law. You can't take all the guns away from everybody and expect that to happen. Because what happens, first thing when you do that, is the only people that you're going to disarm are people like myself and Bob and Don, who are law-abiding citizens who are gun owners. You're going to disarm us. What are the criminals going to do? This kid committed 17 murders. Do you think he's going to be worried about whether he's legal to have a gun? Although he was.
Yes.
He bought this rifle completely legally, went through the background checks, and there are just things that I think, and I am, for one, an individual that would like to see some different background checks, something changed in the law. I think, you know, Don will probably talk about it, but the HIPAA, the health laws where you can't talk about this. The shooter in Aurora, Colorado, in the theater was undergoing mental therapy from a psychiatrist and expressed some pretty evil thoughts, but didn't, because of HIPAA, the psychiatrist couldn't alert law enforcement to that. So to me, that's just crazy. This guy is talking about, you know, short of confessing to a murder, you can't, a doctor or a therapist can't let law enforcement know that. That's crazy. And you get people who are under treatment, severe treatment, like this guy in Aurora was, but unless he's adjudicated by a judge and put in a mental institution, that will not come up on his record when you run your background for a gun purchase, a legal gun purchase. So those are things right there. You don't have to take the guns away. But then again, everybody that says, well, let's get rid of the guns. Look at Chicago. Chicago's got some of the toughest gun laws on the planet. They have got one of the highest shooting and homicide rates every year. 17 people in one day is not a record for Chicago. And crooks do what? They break the law. And until we realize that, you know, just taking guns away from a law-abiding citizen is not going to work. And, you know, I'm very much one of those people that believes a well-trained, good guy with a gun will stop a bad guy. It's the only way to stop a bad guy.
Let's hang for 1 second and go back to the HIPAA law thing, because I'd like to get your comments on that, Don. I know we've run into that here in several major cases where we've had criminals of various types that got away with it because their doctor is precluded from reporting them unless there is an immediate overt act. The guy, as I understand it, the guy tells the doctor, I'm going to kill my neighbor next week. If he says, I'm thinking about killing somebody, it's not specific enough. Am I reading that correctly?
That's exactly what you're reading, Bob. The HIPAA regulations are somewhat convoluted, but the bottom line is this. Unless the patient releases the information or allows the therapist to release the information to a specific party, a lawyer, another doctor, a therapist, a parent in some states, that information received by the therapist, the doctor, the psychiatrist, that information cannot be released when it comes to these types of issues. Yet, if a child goes to a therapist in Nevada or a school teacher or any person except a lawyer and says, my uncle has been molesting me, they immediately have to report that because the failure to report that is a crime. Yet when a person goes to a psychiatrist or a therapist or a drug counselor and says, you know, I've got a real problem with guns and my wife, and I'm really thinking about doing something, and I really think about it a lot, that information, as you point out, cannot be released to authorities without, I know it sounds crazy, without the patient saying that it's fine, or he signs a waiver or signs a release. Now, if there is a specific threat, and I don't know how much more specific you can get than our example in Florida. We have that he wants to become known as a school shooter.
Professional grade
school shooter.
School shooter, yeah.
He also posts numerous pictures of himself on various types of social media, Twitter, Snapchat, and now he's generated, even as late as last night, he has generated dozens of people on Facebook and other social media showing youths, obvious youths, brandishing firearms with promises, quote, day 2 would be lit up, end quote, possibly meaning copycat instances. So, should there be an exception to HIPAA when there is less than an actual specific threat? The answer under these circumstances is probably yes. And is that coming in the future? I think quite possibly. But again, right now that's a legislative issue. I'm sure that these parents are going to own Broward County for the 36 times that the police went to this house and did nothing, and there were no formal reports and no formal adjudication or no request to have this kid evaluated. And of course, the background check system is not infallible. No system is. Black Friday 2017, over 220,000 background checks were done in a single day, at an average statistic of over 9,000 per hour. And of those, hundreds or possibly thousands of people were denied or rejected, many of them on mental health issues where, as you point out, there has been an adjudication by an authorized medical officer or placement, involuntary placement into a facility, or where it's been a placement voluntarily for more than just observation. So for example, under the federal statute, if I put myself in a facility just for a couple of days, if I did it voluntarily and it was only done for observation, technically that should not show up on when you do the background check on the form 4473, which is the form used by the ATF and FBI for background checks. But that is going to change, but that is a legislative issue. And if the responsible gun owners of this country sit down with their coffee and with other responsible gun owners and experts and legislatures and hammer out a solid plan, I think that can work, and that's a first step.
One would hope. You're correct in saying that, the parents of these kids and their relatives are going to own Broward County. If they're looking purely at an expense, it costs so much to put in a system of photo ID. I mean, we can photo ID people that go to the World Series game, everybody coming in the gates, and still on the opposite side, we have had people actually penetrate into the White House through security that's got to be 50 times what you'd put in any school, and they actually get in the building. It's not foolproof, but the idea that this was a cost-saving thing, or they're looking at the county commission there is looking at a cost-saving thing, is ridiculous, because their insurance company obviously will give them a much, much better rate, just talking economics, if they have that screening stuff. It should pay for itself in reduced insurance rates.
Well,
I would think. I mean, it's just economics.
And it goes back to the old thing, Bob, the old, pay me now or pay me later. Yeah. If you're not going to, you cannot invest the money into security measures, whether it's physical security, cameras, computers, those kind of things. You can invest that money in there. If you choose not to, because it's kind of an initial outlay, and if you actually hired armed guards, you're going to have continuing, a labor cost. But what is the school district and the Broward County going to face now with the coming onslaught of lawsuits? Because obviously there was a lot that could have been done, should have been done, and just didn't get done. It's going to be a lot more money,
Yes.
I think, in the very short period of time than it would have been over a long period of time putting in the security devices.
Economically, it makes perfect sense. I mean, why would you not do that? It's like not having a wall at the border. You don't have a wall, you don't have a country. But if you don't have the security in place, then your negligence in not having it in place causes the lawsuits, which are way more. I mean, just looking at it, you know, they spend money on a yearly basis, most of these places, and they say, well, if we put in this, it's going to cost X, but we will get a reduction in our insurance rate that is astounding, because their insurance rate, if you think it's high now, just wait.
Yes.
You know, it's just economic common sense to do that.
That's the problem. You're talking about common sense to some people that don't understand common sense. It's just like, you know, the single point of entry into the school. Had there been a couple of armed guards there, this guy may have not decided, you know, I can't do that here. Now, does that make these kids safe all the way from the school to the school door to their house? No, it doesn't. But folks, it's a big bad world out there, and that's what's going to happen. You can't protect them everywhere. I see that as a big problem, that they spent the time to go, well, we're going to go single point of entry, which is really a good outer layer of security plan. But then they fell flat on their face.
If there's nobody watching
if there's
that
nobody
single
watching
point,
it,
then
That's correct.
yeah, and if I've got a sign, I've got to report to the office. Oh, I want to make sure I report to the office. Well, if I choose not to report and decide to go into the first and second floor with my AR-15 and start killing kids, what are you going to do? There's nothing. The horse is out of and the barn doors, you know, you close it afterwards. But
well, we're talking here about trying to find ways to prevent the next one, and it seems just on a purely economic basis that these counties that are doing their yearly budget or 10-year budget or whatever, obviously over 10 years, they're going, if they have this security system, then they would save enough money on their insurance to do it. Mm-hmm. And you know, they're spending other people's money, obviously, taxpayers' money. So it makes sense to clearly do that. So the next one, 2 years later or whenever, all these copycats that were, you know, one of the things that I've been insistent on these shows, if you follow Fired Up at all, I never use the likeness or the name of the bad guys. And this is another thing we'll talk about after we do a little commercial break here, but is that we are these secondary people who are getting all the publicity, going, you know, maybe I can beat that number, da-da-da-da-da. And certainly the number can be beaten if you plan and so forth and so on. And how many secondary people are we creating that in the next year or two are going to try to, I hate to use the term, beat the record, so they can get their name and their, I mean, I can't believe all these media who gave this guy all this publicity that he wanted. Now he is the most famous person in the world at this moment.
And it drives me crazy as a former law enforcement officer is if you get these copycats, why is there not, the minute that hits social media, why isn't there a couple of police officers knocking on that person's door and saying, hey, we know who you are, you're not going to school, we're going to, you know, at that point, why isn't the district attorney of that locale saying, okay, let's get a search warrant, search the house, if there are guns there, and this kid's got access to firearms or deadly weapons or explosives or whatever, let's get them out of there and let it be adjudicated later, but, you know, rattle these kids' cages.
Well, there's certainly enough for a search warrant there.
Yes, there is.
Absolutely.
And part of this is the legal problems is the liberal media and its sources actively condoning and promoting the violence of these mass shootings by it's allowing these pictures to be posted on social media, yet if I show myself hitting my dog, they censor it.
Yeah.
But I can show weapons and that I'm going to do something at a school, but nobody does anything about it. Maybe hit them in the pocketbook, or as Lenny says, we see the post, we're knocking on the door.
I'm gonna break here for just a second. Our radio feed that runs these shows throughout Nevada, the audio portion of it, runs in half-hour segments. So we're going to take some time here to run a quick commercial to give them a point where the break is, and we'll be back in about 30 seconds and pick it up to the next issue, which is regulating firearms and magazines and regulating regular citizens to prevent them from being school shooters. We'll be right back. Don't go away. And we are back. Again, I am Bob Irwin and from Fired Up. We are here with retired federal agent Lenny Davis and firearms attorney Don Green. The second portion of this, boy, there's just a lot of stuff to cover in what we're doing here, and trying to cover it in an hour, but you know, you've watched the stuff on television. This has been going on and on and on. And new things coming up in 5 minutes. I have 4 or 5 texts while we were on break of things that are changing and other witnesses and so forth and so on. Impossible to keep up. This will shake itself out in another 3 months. Perhaps we'll know what really went on. We're still trying to find out what went on with the 58 people killed in Las Vegas here, and it's, you know, not much of it being released. The second problem is the left side, the anti-gun people, from Dianne Feinstein to some guy from Connecticut or Maryland I was watching on TV this morning. I don't say who it was.
Christopher Murphy.
We have to get rid of all these guns, and that will stop these incidents from happening. I can tell you as a firearms dealer that when they were putting out statistics, which they still are, that say, you know, last 2 years, 2 million people were denied buying a firearm, so we made, you know, prevented 200 felons from getting a firearm they would have misused. That is absolute garbage. What they prevented was the guy getting a firearm from a dealer, so he buys one on the street, steals one. There was a stat in the paper that in Las Vegas, we've had more than 300 firearms stolen in home invasions or burglaries, 300 this year. Las Vegas, population 2 million. If they can't get one on the street or get one from a dealer, that doesn't mean they don't get a gun. They go get one if they want. You can't buy cocaine legally except on every street corner in town or any city you happen to be listening to this in. So, but the deal is now we are going to take the guns away from the honest folks, or even worse, in my opinion, taking away any magazines that hold more than 10 shots. Now we're on kind of the Second Amendment issues. We'll start here actually with Don Green to talk about the issues of the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms is in the Constitution. They compare it with having a driver's license.
Yes.
You don't have a right to drive in the Constitution. So where are we at with this, you know, banning modern sporting rifles, AKs, ARs, anything that's semi-automatic, and in my opinion, worse, the magazines themselves, because if you don't have magazines, you don't have a gun that works anyway.
Yes.
So.
Well, Bob, we have to look that the Second Amendment was part of the first 10 amendments, which were presented to the states so that they would approve the basic Constitution. The states wanted to have these amendments. The only amendment in the entire Constitution which protects a specific property right is the Second Amendment for the right to bear arms. All of the other rights are inchoate rights, such as to vote, to speak, to practice and establish a religion, but only one amendment talks about a specific piece of property, and that is a firearm. It took all the way up until the Heller decision in the 2000s, authored by Justice Scalia, and analyzed and forth hundreds of times this. The majority, and Justice Scalia wrote, the Second Amendment protects the right of an individual to possess a firearm in his or her home, and firearms are those which not only are of enactment of 1792, 1796, but those which are commonly used, and that's an AR-15. There's nothing in Heller. There's nothing in the state court that says there's a, and then you've got other states you've got can't be banned, but Heller's have the weapon. Have said, well, you can have the weapon, but we are going to ban the magazine which feeds into that weapon, semi-automatic pistol or a rifle, and we're either going to ban or we're going to have ammunition you can purchase, or ban the ammunition altogether. The state predominantly are Maryland has a magazine ban, New York, California. The current most litigation right now, California, on the granting of an injunction to prevent the state of California main ban is any magazine, any type of pistol or firearm that which pretty much excludes most of the semi-automatics, most missiles, and most all assault rifles or sporting rifles. For that particular was stayed. That is, it was halted. That was 29th, 2017. Benitez, a judge appointed by FERC, and he is in the United States District Court, Southern District of California in San Diego. On that same day, a judge in the Eastern District of California, sitting in Sacramento, issued reverse injunction and denied injunction for the people that ban on magazines was unconstitutional. So you had two conditions. The first decision, appeal to the Ninth Circuit. The federal judge in Sacramento said, wait a minute, I'm going to hold off denial of the injunction, and let's see what happened. The case before the Ninth Circuit. Ninth Circuit, United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit is based in San Francisco. The Ninth Circuit, for all your viewers, is the largest circuit in the United States. California, Utah, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Anything in the protectorate, in the Pacific. And cases are produced, which are deciding to. The Duncan case has drawn a lot of media and a lot of attention of the and California, the and have filed word briefs to support Judge Benitez or alt on this on the magazines. Here's what California, and we see this possibly 2019 legislature in Nevada. If you have a magazine which is more than 10 rounds, the current law, which is now made, says you can do 3. Take it. That's a joke. Take it to a federal who is a handle or the 10 magazine, or you can take the magazine and try to unload it for $5 or $10, or go to another store. So, additionally, in 2018, see a number of laws being enacted, which will become effective in California, such as the registration of AR-type rifles, which it'll make it a crime not to register these if they have not already been registered, and that by 2019, you will have to do a background check on every ammunition purchase in the state of California, regardless of whether you want to buy 5.56, 223 for the AR type platforms, or the AK-47, that is the 7.62 by 39, the 7.62 by 51, the 308 standard that you see in for the Springfield Armory type rifles, these 308s, or the FALs. You're even going to have to get a background check for 22 long rifle or 25 semi-auto, and they're going to limit the amounts of ammunition which you purchase. So states like California have these laws on the books because the laws are not yet fully enacted, or they are enacted but not yet effective. The litigation has not come forward. So what do we see? We see that we might not get you on the guns, but we're going to get you on the magazines which feed into those guns, or we're going to get you on the ammunition. And without very, very few exceptions, these weapons are not going to be, simply because they can feed the amount of the magazine. And I tell people at gun shows all the time, well, do you understand that the weapon you're buying is not legal in California? Answer, I have a 10-round magazine. It doesn't matter. It's whether the weapon is capable of chambering a magazine which is more than 10 rounds. That becomes the standard. Again, that's splitting hairs with the legal definition, but in a nutshell, Bob, that is what's going on with the litigation as far as magazine bans are concerned and ammunition.
Just a little bit of background for people who don't follow this. Originally, when California tried to outlaw assault weapons,
The evil black rifles,
or anything that would hold a magazine more than 10 shots, they lost in the courts because of the Second Amendment. So they rewrote it to ban the magazines for that, and their courts held that banning the magazine was legal because magazines are not firearms, they're not protected by the Second Amendment. So you, for a long time there, and probably now in some of the jurisdictions, you can have the rifle, but you can't have the magazine. Well, obviously, the rifle isn't going to work very well if you don't have a magazine for it.
Well,
so it was a back way of doing it because they decided that the Second Amendment basically didn't protect magazines.
Right. And this whole ban thing, we've been down this road before, folks. We had a 10-year, from 1994 to 2004, we had a 10-year ban on manufacturing of assault rifles. The Government Accounting Office did a study at Congress' request in about approximately 2003, early 2004, because they knew this ban was going to come up for its sunset. It was originally only enacted as a law for 10 years. Right. They came up, it was coming up for a revote in 2004. The Government Accounting Office, GAO, was commissioned to do to check the statistics and see, did this ban, how much crime did this ban actually stop? The GAO report came back and said it was negligible, almost nothing. So bans don't work because bans only work for law-abiding citizens. If I'm a crook, I will get a gun, I will get an extra magazine, and I don't care. And my perfect example is that, being a former customs agent, is the Republic of Mexico, just south of us. It is almost impossible to own a gun as a civilian in Mexico. In the last, I believe, 5 years, they've had 20,000+ people murdered in Mexico, and it goes up every day. We lose 100 police officers in a bad year here, which is a tragic number. and we go crazy because we're like, man, they're killing cops right and left. In Mexico, the average is between 700 and 1,000 officers killed every year. 1,000 police officers killed every year by cartels who have guns, who do not care that there is a law that bans them from possessing firearms. Technically, in Mexico, the only people that can legally own firearms is the army. The military or the law enforcement technically can't do it, although they've over the years grandfathered that in. So we see a lot of these guns. You were talking earlier, Bob, about the 300 guns being stolen, just this year.
In Las Vegas so far.
In Las Vegas, I can guarantee you the majority of those guns are sitting in Mexico or ready to go to Mexico, because a lot of times over the years, I spent 18 years here as a customs and DHS special agent. We did a lot of search warrants on drug gangs here, and I'll tell you, what did we find almost every time? Stolen firearms, because that was a commodity. You can take an AR-15, which you can buy now for $500 or $600, and trade it easily for a kilo of cocaine or 2 kilos of cocaine in Mexico. So it's a commodity. It's the Bitcoin, if you will, of the cartel. Same thing with ammunition. Of course, it's illegal to export it out of the country, but they don't care, because they're exporting drugs into the country, which are equally as bad. And then when I see, I've done cases where we have seen the Russian, Soviet rocket-propelled grenades. We have seized those. We have seized live hand grenades. They have all come from Mexico and South America. The last live hand grenade case that I'm aware of since I retired was used in a bar in Texas, and the individual didn't know that there were 2 safeties. He just pulled the one traditional pin and didn't realize the other one, so it didn't go off. Was stolen from the Guatemalan army. It was sold, Chinese grenade that was sold to the Guatemalan army. So those are starting, and that was thrown in a bar in Texas, folks. That wasn't thrown in a bar in Guadalajara, okay? This was a bar in Texas. So this stuff is creeping in around you. The bans don't work. Magazine bans don't work, because I'll tell you exactly why magazines bans don't work. Don just hit it on the head when he's talking to people at gun shows. I see people in gun shows that I know come here to Nevada, they come to Las Vegas, they go to the gun show, they buy 30-round magazines, and I guarantee you they're taking them back to California with them.
Sure.
What are you going to do? Are you going to set up a check station and start searching vehicles? It already takes, on a bad day, a bad weekend, a big weekend, should say, like Super Bowl weekend, 12 hours to drive back to from Las Vegas to Southern California. You're not going to stop each and every one of those cars and get those magazines. Those people understand that, and they know they're breaking the law, but they don't care. The ban is only going to affect law-abiding citizens, people who say, and I'll tell you what, I have been a firearms instructor since 1980 for law enforcement. I teach anti-terrorism for the State Department. I run a security firm here. I teach firearms here. I have an AR-15. I have several AR-15 rifles for my own protection, my own home protection. I don't go outside of the city of Las Vegas, the valley per se. I like to get out and go in the desert with my my SUVs and go out and get out of town. I don't ever go out without a high-powered rifle and a bunch of magazines in the vehicle with me. Does that make me a terrorist? No, that makes me someone who wants to protect myself. And if you take that away from me, you're taking that away from every law-abiding citizen. And I'm going to jump into one thing, Don, that you hit on, and that was the property, that the Second Amendment, the gun. The thing that drives me the craziest is when people say, well, that was to cover a musket. The Founding Fathers didn't know we were going to have a gun that was capable like an AR-15. My answer to that is the fact that the musket was the assault rifle of the day. They didn't say, well, you can only have a rifle up to here.
That's correct.
It was, hey, that whatever the British military had, that's what you can have. You can have a firearm. There's been laws over the years that have governed those, and they've been, for the most part, reasonable laws. But at the end of the day, I say to the anti-gunners is, look, if you say, well, it can only be a musket, okay, then get off of your computer, get off of your cell phone, and pick up parchment and a quill pen, because that's how the Constitution was written by the forefathers. So his technology comes along. Get out of your car, get on your feet, ride your horse, run your horse and buggy, because that was transportation then, not a jet, not a car, not a motorcycle. Technology changed, but the Constitution's a living document and says, hey, you have the right to possess firearms for your protection. And I was interviewed right after the October 1st shooting by a crew from one of the large news organizations. And they asked me, well, why does someone need to have an AR-15 for home protection? I said, because it works, it's reliable, it's accurate, and it will save lives. And it has saved lives. There was, within the last year or so, there's some very, very good video of a gun store owner. He's invaded by 3 guys, and he defends himself with the AR-15. Who's to say how I want to defend myself? That shouldn't be the government. It should be. Now, I don't think everybody should run around with a rocket-propelled grenade either. I've shot them in the course of my training and my official duties, but they're fun, but they're not something you want to mess with. But I have no problem with people owning AR-15s. I have 2 adult daughters, and they own guns. They own AR-15s. Why? Because I taught them that those are good guns to protect themselves with. Bans just don't work, folks. The magazine ban in Colorado. What did that do for the state of Colorado? The number one thing it did was drive out a company, Magpul,
Yep.
who makes polymer magazines, primarily for the AR-15, but for several different weapons. Primarily, one of their biggest customers is the United States military, and they took those jobs because they no longer could possess 30-round magazines in Colorado, so they moved to Wyoming. And that's the only thing that ban really hurt. Did it stop the gangbangers in Denver from doing shootings? No. Did it stop them from having them? No. I guarantee you. You go and talk to any major metropolitan police department in the state of Colorado, and when they do search warrants, especially on drugs and gangbangers, they are going to find these magazines, which are banned, and it's a crime for them to have them, but they don't care. They're criminals.
That's correct. And Lanny makes an excellent point when he talks about what these pundits say about gun control. And we pulled up some statistics on gun control in Africa and in Central America. In Central America, it's almost impossible to possess any type of semi-automatic firearm, and nearly impractical to possess any type of handgun. And I'm not going to cite all of the statistics, but in the little country of El Salvador, where it's incredibly difficult to get a firearm unless you're not a police officer or with the military or some sort of paramilitary organization, their death rate by gunfire, illegal guns, is 108.64 for every 100,000 of its citizenry. That's 26 times higher than the United States, which has over 300 million people and has a 4.8 people murdered for 100,000. In Bermuda, a former British protectorate, Bermuda has a higher rate than the United States. Panama, Nicaragua, and Mexico, which you point out, has a statistical murder rate of 16.35 persons per 100,000, which is 4 times high as in the United States, but you've got thousands of police officers who are murdered every couple of years. And then they say, well, you know, maybe they're getting the guns from the Americans. Well, if you go to Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Southern Sudan, Angola, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Gabon, all have significantly higher murder rates than the United States. And these are all by gunshot, by homicide, and not just a legal homicide, which would be like a justifiable shooting, unless you're in, was it Birmingham, where they wanted to change their statistics?
Yeah.
And when you get to the Caribbean, Barbados, Cayman Islands, Haiti, Jamaica have higher murder rates per capita with illegal guns than the United States, with Jamaica being almost 10 times the rate of the United States. Now, we're not here to get involved in statistics, but these countries which we've pointed out have some of the strictest gun control in the entire universe. Look what happened in France. You have the Paris attacks with semi-automatic rifles. France has some of the most strict gun control in the world. That didn't stop them. That didn't stop the people in Belgium. So what did the terrorists do in France? Is they start using a truck. And they kill, 100 people with the truck in Nice about a year and a half ago. And we pointed out that there are a number of U.S. cities, as Lanny pointed out for Chicago, there are about 20 or 25 U.S. cities where the murder rates for illegal guns or illegally utilized guns equal or exceed those frequently cited for Las Vegas as being the greatest mass killing, domestic killing in the United States. But the point is that gun control only controls the law-abiding citizen who wants to do the right thing. And it's not going to stop someone from obtaining either the magazine, the ammunition, or the firearm. Solutions? Maybe those are legislative issues.
They really are legislative issues, but the problem I'm viewing here is the anti-gun people believe so clearly wrongly that restricting firearms is going to restrict crime. And it doesn't. Criminals are criminals. They're going to do criminal things. As my colleagues have pointed out, all it does is prevent people who want to use firearms for self-defense from having the correct firearm, or the firearm they choose for self-defense. The criminals are going to be the same. They're just getting stolen guns or this or that. Regulating I don't want to sound like a bumper sticker here, but regulating an inanimate object. I was doing a court case recently where one of the claims of the defendant was that, he was kind of in a fight and whatever, and his gun went off by itself. Guns don't go off by themselves. It sounds like a bumper sticker, but I've had guns sitting in my house for 45 or 50 years now. I'm old, that are loaded, and they've never shot anybody. They don't fire by themselves. It requires human intervention. And if the human is a criminal, or the human is insane, or the human is drunk, then the decision made by the human is what causes the problem. This is a human engineering problem, not a gun problem. Guns are not the problem. They are, in most cases, the solution. Way more people are shot every year in self-defense than are shot criminally, shot by police, than are shot criminally. So you can't count all gunfire as a negative. We're right up on running out of time here. I appreciate your tuning into this special edition of Fired Up. I was surprised we learned coming in this morning that we're live on Facebook. We didn't know that. Hopefully the message gets out and the listeners won't fall into the trap of regulating inanimate objects. You know, you all have a car that'll go over the speed limit, but you don't drive 150 miles an hour down the road because it's dangerous, even though you can. It's the people that obey the law need to be left alone. The right of the people to keep and bear arms, it says in the Constitution. The people to keep and bear arms. That is, it's not the militia being the National Guard, as the left argues. The militia at the time is all of the people. I think it was over 18 to 45-year-old males. You know, we've caught up. We let women have guns now, and we let them vote, and so on and so on. The courts have brought those decisions around to meet the standards of society now, which is fine, but don't fall into the trap. Yeah, thank you so much for coming in, Don.
My pleasure.
Of course.
Always
It's
educational.
an honor.
Hopefully, you all will take this to heart. We put up a new show every Thursday, generally around 5 p.m. on our YouTube path, bob@firedupmail.com. And our contact information appears on the crawl you can see on the bottom of your screen at home. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it educational. Have a good day.